Is it a no-brainer for the Panthers to exercise a fifth-year option on Ickey Ekwonu's rookie deal? And how will Brant Tillis and Dan Morgan handle Taylor Moton's $31 million cap hit this offseason? We'll talk about that right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, and already getting plenty of questions about the Panthers potentially trading for Myles Garrett and for Cooper Kupp. So I'm going to answer those on Friday, but go ahead and either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. This episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. One more position group for us to break down here when looking at the Panthers offense. Already talked about quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs last week. Earlier this week, talked about tight ends yesterday. Talked about the interior of the offensive line. Now let's talk about the tackles, in particular, Ickey Ekwonu, the Panthers left tackle, and Taylor Moton, the Panthers right tackle, and how their off seasons may play out here in Carolina, as I feel like there are two pretty big decisions the Panthers need to make when it pertains to both Ekwonu and to Taylor Moton. With Ickey Ekwonu, fifth-year option. How is that going to work out? Dan Morgan so far has alluded to, it looks like the Panthers are going to exercise fifth-year option on Ickey Ekwonu, but is that a no-brainer? Did he deserve it in his redemption season in 2024? Then looking at Taylor Moton, he has a $31 million cap hit. Thank you so much, Scott Fitterer and Samir Suleiman, and even in part last year, Brant Tillis and Dan Morgan for restructuring his deal every single offseason since he signed it back in the summer of 2021. And now you're in a situation where you have a really good right tackle, but you cannot have your really good right tackle with a $31 million cap hit, even though you have $20 million as of right now, according to overthecap.com, but you need significant upgrades on the defensive side of the ball and want to be aggressive, smart, but aggressive when it comes free agency in a month's time here coming up in March in 2025. But first, though, let's look back at the offensive tackle season in review, focusing in on Moton and on Ekwonu. We'll talk about some other guys later on here on the show. But starting off with Taylor Moton, the Iron Man streak is over, unfortunately, after he had played in 120 of a possible 120 games since the Panthers drafted him back in 2017, leading up to that game against Chicago Bears. He had an injury to his elbow, and he left that game and then could not play the next week when the Panthers faced off against Atlanta. He had not missed an offensive snap in 76 straight contests prior to exiting the game in Chicago that afternoon. Moton had played in each and every offensive down from week 13 of the 2019 season when Cam Newton was in Cam Newton first stint as Carolina Panthers starting quarterback. Now, of course, Kyle Allen was starting back then, but Cam Newton was on the Panthers roster. That's how long ago it was when the Iron Man streak began. And then when it ended in the first half against the Bears, had played every snap, every single down since week 13 of the 2019 season for the Carolina Panthers, and had made 104 straight starts before missing that start against Atlanta, missing two other starts this season. And this is just an incredible feat for someone who has never been a Pro Bowler. I understand that. Never been an All-Pro, but he has been the model of consistency on an offensive line that has been anything but over the course of that Iron Man streak that Taylor Moton has embarked upon. And we saw this year the offensive line played really well, in large part because of the improvement just talent-wise in the interior, but also the health, having both your starting guards, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis, both play 16 games this season. You didn't get that last year. You got 4 from Austin Corbett. You got 1 from Brady Christensen. So 32 combined compared to 4 or 5 combined. Much better, obviously, in the interior. But let's not forget that Taylor Moton was steady Eddie again at right tackle, even though he missed 3 games this past season. Looking at his Pro Football Focus grades, 77.2 overall PFF grade. That was 22nd out of 81 qualifying offensive tackles this past season. At a 79.8 pass blocking grade. That was 20th out of 80 qualifying offensive tackles. And then a 66.9 run blocking grade. That was 39th out of 75 offensive tackles. He gave up 1 sack, 14 pressures, and was penalized 1 time in 538 pass blocking snaps this past season. His overall grade of 77.2 was the best overall grade he's had since the 2021 season, when he had a 77.5. Prior to that, in 2020, he had an 81 grade. So this was the 3rd highest grade he's ever had in his career. Looking at PFF, he was really good again for Carolina, despite missing those 3 games. And if you look at it, in his career, in the 7 years that he's been a starter on this roster, he has been graded as a top 25 tackle in 6 of those seasons. So 6 out of the 7 years, Taylor Moton has been a starter at right tackle for the Carolina Panthers. He has been a top 25 tackle in the NFL that year. Now, he's never actually been in the top 10, never been in the top 15, but he's consistently been right there in the early 20s. A solid player who hasn't played again at a Pro Bowl or All-Pro level, which has been illustrated by looking at those numbers and where he's been graded, but he has not ever been a liability, and he has been someone who's been reliable, even though for the first time in his career he missed time this past season. Taylor Moton is still the beacon of consistency here in Carolina, and someone who is a valuable asset, although they're going to figure out what his contract's going to look like this offseason. We'll talk about that momentarily. Ickey Ekwonu. A lot of folks last year around this time were saying, move Ickey to guard. What are we doing here? He can't play left tackle. He's a better guard. I had an episode talking about this last January, how to fix the offensive line. And the first episode was looking at Ickey Ekwonu and where the Panthers had an Ickey Ekwonu problem, putting that in quotes. And I came to the conclusion that no, they don't. He played really well as a rookie. Didn't play well as a second-year player. He talked about later on in the offseason last year that he was smelling his own, you know what, and didn't really work out for him as a second-year player playing for his hometown team. And he realized that had to work harder, and it certainly was much better this past season. But I felt like you got the guy 6th overall. He played well. You know he can be a good player. It just wasn't great that second year. We have seen those sophomore slumps happen in the NFL. Why not give it another go? And that's what Dan Morgan wanted to do. And Ickey Ekwonu certainly paid off Dan Morgan for betting on him this past season, as he had a 71.7 PFF grade. That was 36th out of 81 qualifying tackles, the highest PFF grade in his career in his year 3 in Carolina. Had a 66.2 pass blocking grade. Still not great, pretty average. That was 52nd out of 80 tackles, and then 80.5 run blocking grade, the best run blocking grade of his career. Had a 77 last season in 2023. So to have an 80, he's only getting better, and that also gives you a little bit more fuel to the fire of Ickey Ekwonu's better at guard conversation a lot of people want to have. That was 12th, by the way, out of 75 qualifying guards or tackles. There you go. Tackles this past season. And looking at it over the last couple of years, he allowed 7 sacks, 39 pressures, and 593 pass blocking snaps this past season in 2024, which is solid and much better than what we saw in 2023 when he allowed 11 sacks and 44 pressures. So went from 11 and 44 down to 7 and 39. The pressures were still pretty similar, but the sacks were not. And then you look at his rookie year, which you would think was the best year of Ickey Ekwonu, where he struggled early on, and that's what happens when you go up against Myles Garrett, who maybe will be his teammate later on this offseason. We'll find out down the road, and Jadeveon Clowney, who actually is his teammate. And Wouldn't that be nice? Two guys he faced off against in his first career game, both reunite here in Carolina. We'll talk about that later on this week on the mailbag. But 6 sacks he gave up his rookie season, 27 pressures. That is what you would think was the best year of his career. And understand too, like the opportunities that were afforded to pass rushers in 2023 against Ickey Ekwonu were far greater than the opportunities we saw this past year in 2024 and in 2022 when the Panthers offense wasn't a complete bleep show. Like it was early on in 2022, but once Darnold came back, bearded Darnold, they started running the ball. They had one of the best actually not one of the actual best offensive performance in the history of this franchise against the Lions that day. And then this year, the way that Bryce played, and even before that, where the offensive line had a little bit struggles down the stretch there, they had an offense that was more so competent than it had been, of course, in week 1 and week 2, and certainly in 2023. So there weren't that many opportunities where you had to step back, had to protect, and you're trying to chase and come back in those games. That's allowing defenses to pin their ears back. And it's illustrated when looking at PFF, where Ickey Ekwonu faced 684 allowed pressure opportunities, which means non-spike, non-penalty snaps that he played when participating as a pass blocker in 2023. So 684 in 2023 compared to 559 in 24 and 519 as a rookie. So over 100 less he faced this past season, and also nearly 200 less as a rookie. So when there's more volume of snaps we have to protect, there's going to be more of a likelihood of you actually giving up pressures and sacks. Now, is that the greatest argument for Ickey Ekwonu? No, but it's context to why things maybe were so bad for him as a second-year player, having to always say, "Hi, I'm Ickey. Nice to meet you. Who are you playing left guard?" This year, it was always Robert Hunt. And when it wasn't Robert Hunt, it was Chandler Zavala. And he knows those guys. Compared to last year where it's like, okay, I'm a rookie and I'm meeting, or a second-year guy and I'm meeting a new guy every single week. He was much better. And you look at him across his career, just looking at his grades, he has graded out as clearly an above-average tackle the past 2 seasons in Carolina. And I know it doesn't sound like that would be the case, but looking at his overall grades as a rookie, he was slightly above average. And then last year in 2023, just over it. But then this year, clearly an above average tackle. Now, with the 6th overall pick, are you wanting someone who's just an above average tackle clearly? Probably not. You want something a little bit better than that, but it's going to progress. And I think with the way that they have the offensive line, coaching staff put together right now, Joe Gilbert, Harold Goodwin, and Keeley, and those 3 guys individually working with tackles, with guards and centers, I think it's the best kind of apparatus for Ickey Ekwonu to really move forward and to continue to progress in this scheme. And they're providing more help. Thomas Brown, remember him? He talked about, I could have done more to help him. They didn't do a lot to help him. A bunch of injuries, always behind in games, didn't really help him out. It's just like, it was a perfect storm for him to really struggle in 2023 compared to this past season. That was not the case. So he's clearly been an above average tackle past 2 years here in Carolina. When you look at him as a pass blocker, he's been slightly above average as a pass blocker. In 2023, that was the only year where he was certainly a below average, according to PFF when looking at it. Had his highest pass blocking grade as a rookie at 67.5. Again, this past season was 66.2. So he's not been the best pass blocker, and that is the bugaboo about playing tackle. You got to do a much better job than what he's done. So we'll see how that continues to progress heading into his 4th season here in Carolina. And then as a run blocker, he's been well above average. And that goes right to what people were saying about guard, but you're already paying Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt to be your starting guards. And I know I mentioned yesterday that Damian Lewis has a history where he could slide in and play center if they ever wanted to move Ickey Ekwonu to guard, or if injuries necessitated it, who knows, but he's been well above as a run blocker the past 2 seasons after being slightly above it as a rookie. So redemption season for Ickey Ekwonu, but a redemption season enough for him to earn the 5th-year option. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But coming up, what are you going to do, Carolina, about Taylor Moton's contract? Because $31 million, as far as the cap hit goes, that is not a situation that you can live with in 2025. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Looking for tickets to your next big event, maybe last-minute tickets to the big game next week, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache, but with GameTime Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With GameTime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using GameTime Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. No more sifting. And the best part, you're covered with GameTime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Taking a look at overthecap.com, the Carolina Panthers currently have $20.8 million of projected salary cap space for the 2025 season, a new league year beginning on Wednesday, March 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And $20 million is certainly better than being in situations like, I don't know, their friends down there in New Orleans who are perennially underneath the salary cap or over the salary cap and having to find ways to cut players, be able to get down there and not really have much leeway to add to the roster, which has led to the Saints being in last place in the NFC South this past year. And in relative purgatory, as they still don't have a head coach. Maybe it's going to be Kellen Moore. I don't know, but New Orleans, you going to hire anybody? Does it matter? Because right now your cap situation is terrible. So Carolina does not have a bad cap situation, but for a team that went 5-12, and you saw in those final 9 games, went 4-5. Bryce started playing pretty well, but there's some pieces they could still add offensively, and Lord knows defensively, there's a lot to improve this offseason, and $20.8 million ain't going to be enough to do it. So how can they open up some cap space? Well, one way is figuring out what the hell they're going to do with Taylor Moton's cap hit. He has by far the largest cap hit on the team at $31.3 million. I'm going to tell you right now, like I have told you every time I brought it up on this podcast, there is no way in hell Taylor Moton is going to play on a $31.3 million cap hit in 2025. It's untenable. Carolina has to find a way to open up some salary cap space. Now, how did they get here? We'll mention it earlier on the show. Since Taylor Moton, who had the franchise tag slapped on him back in March of 2021, since the Panthers at the last moment were able to sign him to an extension there in July of 2021, every ensuing offseason, so in 2022, 2023, 2024, the Carolina Panthers general manager and cap guy, so that has been Scott Fitterer and Samir Suleiman, and then Dan Morgan and Brant Tillis, every single offseason since he signed that deal, they have restructured his contract to open up salary cap space. So because they've done that, Taylor Moton now has 3 void years at the end of his deal that ends after 2025. He'll be an unrestricted free agent in 2026. At least he's set to be as of this recording and as of the current contract that he has in Carolina. So he has 3 void years, and that has led to the $31 million cap hit that he currently is set to play on in 2025, which the Panthers are still underneath the cap and have plenty of space, but not enough space for them to do what I think they would want to do and like to do this offseason. So what could they do? Well, they could cut him. I know it sounds crazy. Why would you cut somebody who has been healthy the last couple of seasons, who's been a top 25 tackle 6 of the last 7 seasons of his career as a starter? Why would you cut that player who's been the only consistent offensive lineman? Well, you could cut him because you'd save $12.7 million. Now, if you did that, who plays right tackle? Could it be Brady Christensen? Had this conversation briefly yesterday where probably he's not going to be a center. I do think he'll get priced out of Carolina to be someone who's going to start elsewhere. If Carolina says, actually, Brady, we want you to start for us at right tackle, why not do that? Because when Moton was out, that's who filled. No, that's not who filled in. It was Yosh Nijman who filled in. But at left tackle, that's where Brady Christensen played. But they could still look at Brady, or they could look at Yosh Nijman and have him play right tackle. So $12 million, 12.7 to be exact. That's what it would be if they want to cut him. I do not think that that's the right path, that they want to restructure Moton's deal for the fourth straight offseason. That would open up $12.1 million cap space. So less cap space opened up than cutting him by $600,000. So not that big of a deal. Really, it's like $520,000 when looking at the exact figure of it all. But still, it's about the same as far as opening up some cap space, and you keep Moton on the roster again to start at right tackle. Or they could do what I was not begging, but I was suggesting they do last season, and that's extend him. And that opens up the most cap space at $12.9 million, nearly $13 million if they do that option. Sign him to an extension. I understand he had the injuries this past year, but he has been good for you. He's been a leader in that locker room. Why not do it? Why not keep around the most consistent offensive lineman that you have, and instead of having to try and find his replacement? So that would be my preferred scenario, but we'll see what they do. There's also another element to understand, that Moton is due a $3 million roster bonus if he's on the roster on the third day of the 2025 league year coming up. So on that Friday, I believe the 15th, or I guess it would not be the 15th, it'd be the 14th, doing math in my head, he would, if he's on the roster, then Carolina owes him $3 million roster bonus. So we'll see how all this plays out. I think the extension would probably make the most sense, but it's going to be something that they got to consider, certainly, as they look to open up some more cap space before heading into free agency in 2025. So how will the Panthers tackle the offensive tackle position this offseason? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. One total yard from Patrick Mahomes or from Jalen Hurts, and you get a win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. So how will the Carolina Panthers tackle the offensive tackle position? Sorry for doing that twice. Couldn't help myself. I suppose I could have, but I decided not to restrain myself. Well, they've already gone to work when it comes to tackle position. They signed Brandon Walton to a futures contract last month. He was among about a dozen players they signed to futures contracts. Who is Brandon Walton? I don't know. We'll talk about him at some point later on this offseason, but he's not the focus of today's conversation. The focus really is on Ickey. It's on Taylor, and it's also on Yosh Nijman. So one thing that they're going to have to decide to do come March, they could do it around March, but they probably won't. But come May, actually, is whether to exercise the fifth-year option on Ickey Ekwonu. As mentioned earlier here on the show, Ickey Ekwonu has been clearly an above-average tackle in the 3 seasons at left tackle here in Carolina. Rookie year looked good. Second year didn't look that great, and this year was a bounce back closer to the rookie year. But according to PFF, it was the best year he's had overall as an offensive tackle in the NFL here with the Carolina Panthers. Been slightly above average as a pass blocker, but like ever so slightly. And then he's been well above average as a run blocker. So he is a good player. He's someone who took the right steps, and you're hoping for an even bigger step coming up in 2025 in year 4 as Panthers starting left tackle. And Dan Morgan, he did talk about this the day after the Panthers clean out the locker rooms there. And he said that he felt like Ickey Ekwonu had done what they wanted, that he was likely going to be someone that was going to get his fifth-year option exercise. It sounds like something that they want to do. And if they do that, he has hit the playtime benchmark that they have for the fifth-year option for players drafted in the first round back in 2022. And that would pay him $18.4 million. That would also be $18.4 million cap hit for the 2026 season. So it will not have any impact on this year, and it's nice to allow the Panthers to plan ahead, but that's what they could do. They could also decide to extend him. I think right now the best thing to do is exercise fifth-year option, let him play again this upcoming season. That'd be year 4, and then let him play in the fifth-year option. And then if he plays really well after year 4, then you could maybe do an extension. If you're not quite sure yet, let him play on that fifth-year option and then figure things out in the offseason there in 2027. But right now, Ickey Ekwonu, in my opinion, should absolutely be the starting left tackle in 2025 and in 2026, and then make a decision either next offseason or in 2027 offseason to figure out what to do with him long term. But he will be the Carolina Panthers starting left tackle for the next 2 seasons. Certainly, I think will that be the case. Now, Josh Nijman is someone to think about here, as he came in as insurance in case something happened to Taylor or something happened to Ickey. But really, if Ickey struggled again, Josh Nijman could have gone over to left tackle. But we did see when Ickey was out, it was Brady Christensen, not Josh Nijman, who stepped in there to play left tackle. And when there was injuries at center, it was Brady Christensen who stepped in. So Brady Christensen clearly had a little bit more value to this offensive line in Carolina in 2024 than Josh Nijman did. And when Josh Nijman played, it was at right tackle in place of Taylor Moton. And he signed last year a 2-year, $8 million contract that gave him $4.96 million in guarantees. And also, it gives him, if you look at this year, a $1 million roster bonus if he's on the roster on the 3rd day of the new league year coming up on March 14th. So looking at this past year, though, his numbers weren't all that impressive for somebody who potentially could have come in and taken Ickey's job or taken Taylor's job, and he was the primary backup you would have thought at tackle, as he had a 57.9 PFF grade. That was 95th out of 141 tackles who played this past season when getting rid of the snap minimum over on PFF. Had a 59.5 pass blocking grade. That was 83rd out of 141. And then a 52.0 run blocking grade. That was 112th out of 141. And of course, all those are below average. Now, you would imagine a guy who is a backup tackle in the NFL would be below average. But Brady Christensen was a backup tackle, and he wasn't below average when he went out there and played at left tackle and when he had to play at center. So with that being said, and with Josh Nijman having by far the lowest grade of any of the guys who played tackle this past season, and he played 187 snaps, allowed 2 sacks, 11 pressures in 126 snaps that were pass blocking snaps. Does it make sense to keep him again this upcoming season? I know it's a 2-year deal. I know there's a lot of benchmarks he could have hit playing time wise that could have given him more money if that necessitated him going out there and playing, whether it was injury or just performance issues that we saw from Ickey Ekwonu, or maybe we could have seen from Taylor Moton, who did struggle during training camp, but once the season began, that was not the case. Do they decide to do that? Because if they want to cut him, they save $3.6 million. And it's only a $1.4 million dead cap hit if they decide to do that. So that's something to certainly monitor, as Nijman wasn't that impressive. Now, they are losing Brady Christensen, and that certainly should factor into whether they keep Josh Nijman or not, because you're losing your other backup tackle. So do you want to get rid of both of them and then be in a situation where, well, it's only Ickey, it's only Taylor? And I do think that they'll either restructure or they'll extend. I think they should extend Taylor Moton. So I do think he'll be back again this year, or they could look at the draft possibly and start looking down the road and understanding that while Moton has played that Ironman streak, it's a lot of wear and tear on the body. And you saw this past year, it caught up to him, missed some time. Now it's football. It happens. And it's really fortunate for Taylor Moton that he didn't have any sort of injuries that kept him out of games during that Ironman streak, the previous 7 seasons in Carolina. Well, you look at it right now, if they wanted to get a tackle, it would make sense to do it in the 2nd round. And looking at all of the mock drafts, looks like Carolina is going to draft 57th overall, and that will be right there in the 2nd round. That's the Rams picks that they got. Unfortunately, the Rams were better than they appeared to have been earlier on this season, when it was looking like, oh, the Panthers are going to get a pick very close to the one that they gave up to the Bears a couple of years ago when trading up to get Bryce Young. The 3 guys I'm really looking at if they're going to take a tackle is Arianti Ursary from Minnesota. Now, he played left tackle possibly could play right tackle. I suppose they could move Ickey to right tackle that they wanted to do. But Ariante Ursary, he played at Minnesota left tackle. There's Donovan Jackson, who played guard but then played tackle because of the injuries that Ohio State had this past season. So it feels like he could play right tackle, certainly at the NFL level, could play guard if they needed to, probably could play center as well. Then there's Cam Williams out of Texas, who did play right tackle this past season for the Longhorns. So those are three guys we're looking at PFF's big board who are right there in the 50s that may be available at 57 if Carolina wants to go down that road. But for me, go ahead and exercise fifth-year option on Ickey Ekwonu. Extend Taylor Moton, open up nearly $13 million of cap space. Probably keep Josh Diamond around. Maybe find a way to rework that, not give him that $1 million roster bonus that's coming up, or at least it's $1 million of his salary in 2025 that's fully guaranteed. That's what it actually is. Excuse me, earlier there. So find a way to keep him around. And I don't know, maybe getting someone in day two would make sense just to have that guy be there down the road. But they extend Taylor, then they wouldn't need it. So we'll see what happens. But I do think that Taylor and Ickey should be back. We'll see about Josh Diamond, probably the right thing to do. But the draft, let's not overlook a tackle. Because last year in the draft, they looked at positions like running back, which we didn't see that coming. Linebacker, didn't see that one coming. They looked at positions that they felt like down the road they were going to need help in. And turns out at linebacker, so when Trevor Wallace actually needed help right away. So we'll see how things play out at offensive tackle for the Carolina Panthers coming up here this offseason in 2025. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast for our Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all, subscribe or follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where I'll be back with you on Friday answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. You do not have to ask about the Panthers trading for Myles Garrett or for Cooper Kupp. People have already asked that. So if you have any other questions, please let me know what those are. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding in. I will talk to y'all on Thursday as we'll take a look at the state of the Carolina Panthers offense heading into the new league year in March here on Locked On Panthers.